the best podcast, the Heidelcast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
Are there really big differences between the Heidelberg Catechism and the Westminster Standards? Stay tuned and find out.
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
You would do yourself a favor by downloading the Heidel app from the App Store or Google Play. We've added notifications which you can turn on or off, and that way you can see right there on your phone what's new in the Heidelverse. And be sure to subscribe to the Heidelcast in any podcast app.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.
Okay, let's open up the coffer and see what we find. It is actually a text, and it's from Janet, and she says the following. I can see it now. I'm new to Reformed theology, having recently come out of a master's seminary graduate manned MacArthurite, in parenthesis, church. I'm now attending a Reformed Presbyterian church, Vanguard Presbytery. That's a presbytery that broke away from the PCA. That's Clark adding that. She continues, I'm curious about the different confessions, especially the differences or discrepancies, between the Westminster and Heidelberg. Also would like to know which confession and catechism John Calvin would have subscribed to. I'm so glad I found your site. Well, we are very excited that you found the Heidelblog and the Heidelcast at all. Thank you for writing, and thank you for listening. So here's the deal. There's a lot of loose talk about the differences, alleged differences between the Heidelberg Catechism and the Westminster Confession. And most of the time, I think those differences are imaginary. I don't think that in substance there are any real differences between the Heidelberg and the Westminster. There are pedagogical differences. In other words, things are presented differently. There are formal differences in that things are structured differently, but in substance, when you ask the Westminster divines, what do you think about this doctrine or this biblical teaching? And if you ask the framers of the Heidelberg Catechism, what do you think about these same questions? You won't get answers that are very different. And the reason is because a number of the framers of the Westminster Confession, not all of them, but a number of them, I would say most of them were directly or indirectly familiar with the work of the primary framers of the Heidelberg Catechism. Those, I don't know whom they read who went to Cambridge, but I do know, although I suspect they were reading Ursitis, most of the Reformed were in that period, but I know for a fact that those divines at the Westminster Assembly who studied theology at Oxford were assigned to read Ursinus's lectures on the Heidelberg Catechism. The Latin title is Corpus Doctrinae, the body of doctrine. And there was an English translation available in the late 16th century, and then obviously it would be available into the 17th century. And I have handled for myself and used the very copy that they used. It's, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think they've moved it since it's sat there for hundreds of years. It's chained to a shelf in the Duke Humphreys Library, which is actually within the Bodleian Library. You go in, and you go, if you have a pass, you go past the fellow who sort of checks the passes of the students. On the way up the stairs, go through the lower reading room, as I recall, and then up the stairs to the Duke Humphreys. That was the place where I spent maybe not, well, I spent a fair bit of time up there. I was going to say most of my time. Maybe, I don't know. But I spent a lot of time up there in the years I was there, handling those 16th and 17th century volumes And I wish very much I could go back sometimes. There are things I would do that I didn't do. I had a chance to look at the earliest copy of the Apostles' Creed, and stupidly, I didn't do it.
I'm a victim of circumstance.
No, I was just being stupid.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, it is.
Is everybody dumb?
No, Curly, definitely not. Everybody is not dumb. It's just I. Anyway, so as I say, most of the differences are not substantial. They are formal. They are structural. And a lot of them are due to in fact, all of them are due really to the different settings and context in which the two documents were written. The Heidelberg Catechism was published in 1563. It was written originally in German, translated into Latin, and then Dutch, and then English, and then many, many languages. But it was written for a particular time, particular place. It was written in a German-speaking Palatinate, an electoral district within what we now think of as Germany, within the Holy Roman Empire, which was in the process of becoming reformed, and it was surrounded by Lutheran and Roman Catholic districts, electorates, and the legal status of the Reformed was in doubt in that period. And so they were in danger of being invaded because they held the wrong religion. Again, heads up to all our theocrats out there who think that theocracy will solve our problems and fix things, when in fact history tells us it's going to plunge us back into endless wars. Why do I know that? Because history tells us that, and human beings haven't changed. We're not any better than we were 400 years ago. 500 years ago when we were at war through pretty much all of the 16th century and all of the 17th century because one state thought the other state had the wrong religion. And some states thought the people within that state had the wrong religion. And that's why the American founders set up this glorious republic so that it wouldn't have a national religion. And then by 1833, the courts eliminated or disestablished the state churches as well. So there were no longer, not only was there no longer a national religion, a federal religion, and now there was by 1833, no state religion either. So at any rate, it was very difficult to be reformed in the Palatinate in the 16th century. It was dangerous. And so they wrote the Catechism in that context. And they said what they needed to say, what they wanted to say. It's not like they temporized or were misleading or anything. But it's 1563. In other words, the Reformation is still developing. It's in the middle of the confessionalist period or confessional period, and also confessionalization. In particular, confessions are being imposed on various areas at the same time as the various groups, the Lutherans, the Reformed, and even the Anabaptists, who are not Protestant, didn't subscribe to the Reformation, disagreed with the fundamental tenets of the Reformation, but they were working out their own confession. And so it's a period of consolidation, still, in a sense, relatively early in the Reformation. By the time you get to the 1640s, it's 80 years later. The English are in the middle of a civil war. And the Reformed have allied in England with the Scots. And so now you have Scottish delegates at the Assembly. You're in the middle of the Civil War between royalists, those who support the crown, and we might call them Republicans. They were called parliamentarians. You have two armies, a parliamentary army led by a Congregationalist, and you have a royalist army. So they're literally trying to kill each other to determine who's going to be in charge of the state and thus state religion in the middle of the 17th century. The Reformed have had 80 years to think through a variety of questions where, for example, Ursinus is just beginning to formulate the covenant of works before the fall, and Livianus is beginning to think about a covenant of redemption before all time. In other words, the pre-temporal covenant of redemption, and he's also in the early stages of thinking about a pre-lapsarian, pre-fall covenant of works, and then they're working out the continuity of the covenant of grace and the multiple administrations.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.
So there are a lot of things going on, in the 17th century that are in the very early stages of the development in the 16th century. In the 17th century, the covenant of works is a given. The covenant of redemption is widely accepted. It's widely accepted and taught that, what happened at Sinai was a restatement or a republication of the covenant of works that God had made with Adam. Mainly, they thought in order to teach the Israelites the greatness of their sin and misery. The more developed idea of the unity of the covenant of works. There's been a lot of work done on a number of theological topics and a number of topics that have come up. There's an antinomian crisis, in part provoked by the Civil War in England in the middle of the 17th century. So the settings are very different, and the way they thought about teaching was different. They started off trying to revise at the Westminster Assembly, trying to revise the Anglican Articles, and then they abandoned it and started from scratch. So when you look at the Westminster Shorter Catechism, it asks, what is the chief end of man? You look at the Heidelberg Catechism, it says, what is your only comfort in life and in death? So in substance, they give the same answer to those questions, but pedagogically, the order of teaching is different. And people mistake that for a substantial difference. Some people have said there's a difference on the Christian Sabbath. And they've tried to, draw a sharp, bright line between the Heidelberg and the Westminster standards on the Sabbath. I don't think that works very well, if only because I've read Ursinus' lectures on the Catechism, and you can see that in substance they are not very different. I just did an episode on that not too long ago, so if you go back to heidelcast.org and look at the minicast section, you will see an episode on the Sabbath, whether there's any great difference between the various Reformed traditions on the Sabbath. And then she asks, finally,
Heidelcast.
The Heidelcast.
About what Calvin would have subscribed to. Okay, and two things here. One, when we're talking about subscription here, we're talking literally, well, figuratively, I guess, now, but in the 16th and 17th century, we're talking about literally writing one's name underneath the document. And of course, in my ecclesiastical setting in the United Reformed Churches, we still actually do that. We come forward at classes, which is the equivalent of a presbytery. It's a regional gathering of elders and ministers. And there's a document there, and we literally sign our names, and we say, this is my confession of faith, the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgian Confession, and the Canons of Dort. And so we literally subscribe. But most of the time when people talk about subscription, they mean it figuratively, but the imagery is literally writing one's name underneath the document. So it is subscribing. And maybe you subscribe to the newspaper, but you subscribe the Heidelberg, the Belgic, and the Canons. And then I also, as a professor, subscribe the Westminster Standards as well. So that's one thing. Two, what would Calvin have done? Well, we don't have to speculate about that. We can see what Calvin did. He had his own confession, or there was a Genevan confession. It wasn't just his. And then he produced what we might think of as 2 or possibly 3 catechisms. And you say, that's amazing. I didn't know that. Where could I find out more about that? Well, I'll tell you, it is in a 4-volume set, although you don't have to buy all 4 volumes. I think you should. Eventually, these things will go out of print, and then you'll want to read them, and you won't be able to very easily because it'll be out of print, and you'll have to wait till it comes back into print. But it's edited by James Dennison, and it's a 4-volume series called Reformed Confessions of the 16th and 17th Centuries in English Translation. And in Volume 1, we see here, I actually have it in my hands, and I have it on the screen in front of me because you can get it through Logos. So I suppose if the hard copies go out of print, that's true. You can get it through Logos. You have to get the program and buy the various books, but you can do it. And there's a 1537 catechism, Calvin's catechism that he wrote and published and used. And then there's a Geneva Confession, 1536, 1537. It's very early and not highly developed, not really exactly a mature confession. And, you could see it's the early days yet. And then Calvin's Catechism 1538, and then his final Catechism 1545, which is the one people tend to use. Well, I'm not sure actually that's true, because T.F. Torrance, I think, in the School of Faith published the early one. And I have seen other people citing the early one, but so let me speak for myself. I tend to go to the 1545 since that's the most mature version of his catechism. And one place you can, let me put this volume back. Hang on here. Stand there and hold it. It's kind of hefty. One place you can see a difference between the earlier and later versions of the catechisms, and particularly between the catechism and the confession, is a more elaborate doctrine of imputation. And it's very clear in the 1545 edition of Calvin's Catechism, and it may be a little less clear. It's probably implied in the confession, but as I say, it's a very early document, and it's very, very basic. And I, off the top of my head, don't even know how much Calvin had to do with that confession. It may be that Farel did that before Calvin got there, but I don't know, and it's been a while since I've looked at it. But so we don't have to speculate as to what he would have subscribed, because there's a Genevan confession that he had to hand. And then there was, by the way, a French confession from 1559 in which he had a hand that was much more mature. And, that would have reflected his thinking, I think more fully than the earlier confession from 36, 37 for sure. So, Janet, if you're asking me to speculate which he would have subscribed, it's speculation. It's not history. If you're asking, would he have disagreed with either of them? I don't think so. He had the Heidelberg Catechism. He had opportunity to read it, and I don't remember him disagreeing with anything. I know Olivianus sent him a copy, and my impression is that he approved of it. He had some concerns about the Belgic Confession, which is one of our three forms of unity, from 1561, and eventually he gave his approval. Nobody knows exactly why he hesitated. It probably had something to do with the fact that the Belgic was a revision of the French Confession, which had just been done. And he probably wondered, why did you revise this? We just did this. And the reason that Guy de Bray revised the French to make the Belgic Confession was because the Belgians needed their own confession. They couldn't just use a French confession, and for political reasons. There are some other, I think, formal pedagogical differences between the Belgic and the French. I actually prefer the Belgic. The French has a different rhetorical character than the Belgic. The French is a little more stiff, a little more formal. Belgic is a little less formal, a little more pastoral in tone. And I'm confident that Calvin would have supported the canons of Dort were he alive to do it. But again, that's speculation, and I don't think there's anything in the Westminster standards with which Calvin would have disagreed. People have tried to drive a wedge between Calvin and the standards on assurance, and there's an article on the Heidelblog that addresses that. So if you just go to heidelblog.net and you use the search function, you can type in Calvin Assurance Westminster, and that will bring the article right up. If you know how to use Google Site Search, that's also a powerful way to find things on the Heidelblog.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidelmedia production.
The best podcast